հայերեն խոսում եմ, բայց այսօր որոշել եմ անգլերեն ներկայացնել զեկույցը, որովհետև այս աշխատությունը կատարել եմ հիմնականում արաբերենով, ինտերվյուները և դատան հավաքել ենք արաբերենով և հրատարակել եմ անգլերենով, դրա համար կներեք հաջորդին ավելի պատրաստված կգամ։ Okay, so war. We're going to talk about war, how ugly it is, and we're going to focus on displacement. This is a depiction of an Armenian painter of war and revolution. It's ugly, it's promising, it can fail more likely than succeed. It can bring down people, systems, and it can create new ones. But war is also about displacement. Most wars are stories of displacement. And displacement has many faces. And I think for many conflicts in the Middle East, but also in the Caucasus, it's important to distinguish between different shades and different forms of displacement. Essentially, we first imagine displacement as a result of war, and that's true. And if we go and delve into the Syrian case, which is going to be the main case that I build my thesis on, and then I'm going to make few parallels with the Artsakh and Gaza conflict. But let's first understand displacement and the distinction between displacement as a result of war and forced transfer, which is one form of displacement. It is a war crime, as we just heard from the previous speaker. It is punishable by the ICC. It is a generational trauma. I was displaced from Armenia because of the war, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Then I lived in Aleppo. Then I was again displaced from Aleppo to Europe. Now I'm back in Armenia. Hopefully I will not be displaced from Armenia. So it's a generational trauma for a lot of people. It is also, of course, a human practice. But the most dangerous aspect, arguably, the most dangerous aspect of forced displacement is when it becomes the solution, when it becomes a means to manage conflicts. And this is what we're going to focus on today. Syria, as I said, is going to be the main case, and I have lived in Syria and I've looked at Syria for the past, I think, 10 years professionally. Yeah, my first conference was in June 2013, and now we are 2023. So for 10 years I've studied Syria quite in depth. And I'm not going to go into the details, but just to catch up, the conflict, the uprising started in 2011 and developed into a full-fledged war in 2012. But there was an interesting let's say, a development that I caught in my research that I think a lot of people did not notice, that the government forces, the Syrian government forces, its local allies and the foreign allies, they faced a dilemma when they were fighting the opposition, the armed rebels in 2012. The dilemma was that they would come, the Syrian government or the regime, call it whatever you want, with its allies would come, let's say, control one village or one city. And it would bring under its total control because it has quite a strong military and security abilities. But as soon as it withdrew, the protests and the conflict emerged again. So one way we saw in few cases that there was outright massacre of people. In few cases we saw that there was some sort of a truce or reconciliation. But in many cases also it happened that the government would come, would reoccupy the area, and it would displace people. But this was a dilemma. Why? Because the displaced people would go to the nearby village or to a nearby region and spark rebellion there. And this was a never-ending cycle. I always like to bring Homs. I'm sure you've heard about Homs, the central province of Syria. Gives a good example. The government launched a military offensive in July 2011 in Homs city, where essentially the rebellion started. The rebels were defeated, and they moved to Qusayr, which was a major battle later in 2013. When the government came and recaptured Qusayr, they moved to another region in the border area of Lebanon. When the government in 2014 reoccupied this area, they moved back to Homs. So you see, this endless cycle of fighting each other was one of the reasons why the government or the regime had to come up with a solution. And the solution comes back to the way how the regime essentially saw these people, the rebels and their social base. In Arabic, there's a word, it's called hadin al-sha'biyya. It's not, social base is not the exact translation, but I can come up with a better one. It is essentially a group of people, a segment of the Syrian society, that the government sees them as the incubator for rebellion. Look, we're not just talking about rebels who hold arms and fight. We're talking about social network. We're talking about dense social networks, in fact, who sustain the rebellion against Assad. And in fact, I managed to, with a group of researchers, we managed to talk to very senior Syrian officials who provided roughly this definition. This is not a quote, but those are their words. They see this segment of population as conservative, sectarian, mostly Sunni, conservative, with sectarian tendencies, flawed convictions about the regime that they believe and they want to tear down the regime. And then essentially they cannot be negotiated, and they are tie bones. One of the officials were explaining that if we keep them in our areas, this rebellion will repeat. Now you will understand where I'm coming from this far. Essentially, what was their solution was not to reconcile with this social base, not to massacre, except in certain instances, not to come up with a new political solution or a reconciliation mechanism, but to essentially forcefully transfer them from many places in Syria to opposition-held areas. And where did this come from? It came from, again, Homs. Actually, in 2014, these rebels who again gathered in Homs essentially were besieged by the government. There was no solution. The government could not take entire areas, and the rebels could not win. After many multi-party prolonged negotiations that I'm not going to go into details, after approximately 12 months, they decided to transfer this population from Homs to rural Homs. Essentially, what the government was doing with Russian and Iranian mediation as well, it was essentially uprooting these people who would keep the rebellion alive, and in the future would be the incubator for new rebellion and revolution, was uprooting from strategic areas and transferring somewhere else. Was it completely pre-planned, this transfer? It would be an exaggeration if we say yes. It was not completely pre-planned, because let's not forget, war creates a lot of factors and circumstances. So partly it was because of the war and this endless cycle, but in part was also pre-planned. And this experience in Homs in 2014 gave birth essentially to a strategy which evolved over time. It became a blueprint. It essentially became methodical. The government and its allies would besiege, would starve, would pressure the social base and the rebels, eventually giving them two choices. Either to stay and go through security vetting and security process, which a lot of people would not want to because of high risks, or leave the area, just transfer without, Russian peacekeepers would guarantee their movement to another place. Between 2016 and 2018, a conservative number is that 200,000 people were forcefully transferred from different parts of Syria into Idlib. And now let's look at Idlib, because that's also quite interesting. This solution is usually, so the thing is that I conceptualized this understanding as uprooting people, the social base as a solution based on the Syrian government experience. But then I realized that actually Turkey is quite involved in a quite similar business in the north. Just a quick geographic presentation. This is Syria 2021. Essentially, the government in the blue has held most of these places. In the northwest, you have rebel-held areas, a mix of rebel, Turkish, and jihadi forces, and the green is the Kurdish area. We're going to focus on Afrin, where I've put the circle. What was interesting is that Turkey launched several military operations in Syria. 2016 was the first one. The second one was in January 2018, when it took Afrin. Afrin in the northeast and the northwest is a Kurdish, historically Kurdish area. And they launched the operation with the opposition. They captured Afrin and they displaced roughly half the population, at least some 150,000 Kurds. They displaced it from that circle into other green areas. But guess who replaced these displaced people in Afrin? Those who were displaced from around Damascus by the Syrian government were essentially given homes in Afrin. So the social base that was threatening for Assad, President Assad, it became a leverage for Turkey against the Kurds in its border areas. So this is this is a picture of a camp, a settlement, a compound that was built by NGOs supported by Turkey and vetted by Turkey in Afrin, in areas which essentially Kurds lived before. But this was populated by IDPs, Arab, mostly conservative Sunni IDPs coming from around Damascus. So essentially, just to recap, it's one agenda feeding into another, one population transfer feeding into another. And here, what's fascinating is that Assad and the government, obviously, they never really admit to forcefully transferring people. But from the Turkish perspective, it is quite astonishing to see that this whole population engineering, demographic engineering, is quite open and not even secret. This is a news from a Turkish website where they praise that a Kuwaiti funder has funded this compound, and it is essentially a symbol of demographic engineering. Even more so, I mean, not to be accused of being Armenian and attacking Turkey, President Erdogan himself, it was quite astonishing when this news came out. He, in this article, in this interview, he claimed that Arabs, Kurds are not suitable to live in these border areas of Syria. He's pointing to the border areas of Syria and arguing in this interview that, those are desert areas, although it's not entirely true, actually. Those are desert areas and it's suitable for Arabs and not Kurds. And this is after its second operation in this area, where it again engaged in ethnic cleansing and repopulating the area with Arabs. So this whole thing is to say that at its core, what the Syrian government was doing, and later what Turkey had done, was essentially turning population transfer into a solution. Uprooting Kurds from Afrin and repopulating with Arab populations, creating a new reality that will secure the Turkish border. Uprooting people from around Damascus and sending them to Idlib essentially made President Assad to curb rebellion and secure its power. But now you might be wondering why I'm talking about Syria and Turkey. That's because those cases help me also to understand what happened in Artsakh. I will skip that because of no time. In Artsakh and actually Gaza. You will be forgiven to say that the conflicts are very different, and indeed they are very different. And I just want to make clear that I am not comparing Syria or Afrin to Artsakh or Palestine, Gaza. But let's contemplate together about the rationale of forced population transfers and ethnic cleansing in those all areas. If we take, for instance, the Artsakh case, I have heard from good friends who helped me in this research, Sergei, to in corridors and in some conferences, Azerbaijanis would say no Armenians, no problems. It's very similar to what you would hear from Syrian officials talking about Damascus. No conservative Sunni population, you essentially don't have rebellion. Not now, not later, not in the future. And even if you look at the tactics that Azerbaijan used to essentially end or displace Armenians from Artsakh, I don't have a proof, but I would even suspect that they benefited from the Syrian example. Besiege, terror, cut gas, cut electricity, launch military operations, etc. There's one fundamental thing, I know I might be a bit over my time, but I need to say this very important. There's something fundamental in all these cases, is that perpetrator never says that, you cannot come back. Syrians say, you are very welcome, you can come back to Damascus. Azeris say, if you want, come and become a citizen of Azerbaijan. But that is not true. As we heard in the previous presentation, that is actually not true. They create conditions which are almost impossible for this social base, whether it's Armenians or the conservative Sunnis or the Kurds, to essentially safely return to their area. But also in this whole thing, there are geopolitical dimensions which I didn't have time to talk, but we can discuss it in the later. I want to make one quick reference also to Gaza. It is quite astonishing to see how Israel is openly talking about population transfer from Gaza. And here again, the rationale is quite similar to what we saw in Syria, Turkey, and other places. Is that if you keep Palestinians there, if you keep Hamas and its social base there, the rebellion will emerge again. And as a matter of fact, there's intelligence directorate in Israel. They made a report which was secret and became open, detailing exactly the same rationale that we're talking about, explaining that if Palestinians would stay in Gaza, we would face rebellion again. And they were proposing transfers and etc. And I conclude with a note that actually Avigdor Lieberman, even when talking about this issue, made reference to Karabaugh's case with an Azeri news, essentially praising the ethnic cleansing and hoping to repeat that. Thank you for listening, and happy to answer any questions in Armenian or English or Arabic.